Ali, how you doing?
Good. How are you? Good to see you again.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me in your Microsoft Technology Center.
I know it took us some time to schedule this, but everybody's busy, including you and I, right?
Yeah, and we're in Surf City for those that are just listening. And I've been trying to get on your schedule for a while. And just quickly, how we know each other. I got hired on about 2 years ago, and I was around the Microsoft Technology Center quite a bit because you guys do all these different upskillings and you're teaching customers new things and the art of the possible. I'll let you get into that stuff. But right away, I realized just how incredibly inclusive that you are. You have this high amount of energy. I've never heard you say no to anything from colleagues or customers. And I'd love to just learn more about you here. So I'm really excited to finally get this chance to talk to you, and we'll have some fun today.
Time flies, man. Interestingly enough, I remember when I first met you, I was talking about this story to a customer of yours. And you came to me and you started asking about, how this happened, what are you doing with the data, so on and so forth. So ever since, it's been a great ride with you. And we've done some quite interesting gigs together with your customers and my customers, right?
We've made some really big impacts, and it's been super fun. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be this chief architect of the Microsoft Technology Center, and what the Microsoft Technology Center is, and your story.
Sure. So I joined Microsoft about 14 years ago, this past March. And when I joined, I never thought I'm going to stay around for this many years. I came from Intuit, and I always had the passion to work for Microsoft, and the start kind of aligned. And here I am 14 years later. And what we do, initially I was part of Microsoft Services. So like you guys, we were at the field going and meeting with the customers and implementing enterprise solutions when there were no clouds. But at a technology center, you said it perfectly. I mean, this is a customer-facing facility. We are very open. We always want to provide this white glove service. And to our team members, customer is not just like Microsoft customer. You are the customer. So we have internal customers, we have partners as customers, and we have the customer. And one thing that we try to convey the message is that you can always make things happen when everybody works as a team. And this is one of our major goals. We have this art of being a great facilitator. In fact, whenever we hire new team members, they usually come from a deep technical background. But the transition period is for them to really kind of getting out of that being a technical geek to somebody who can facilitate, who can understand business problems and be able to translate them to feature functionality solutions. And we have 14 locations in the US. I believe the last number I heard was 52 worldwide. And all these MTC centers, they provide you the same services. So like you have customers that they may be in multiple regions. And the goal is when they come to MTC in Irvine and they do engagements, if the other team members from your customer goes to MTC in Boston or in Denver, they're going to see the exact same process and same features and capability that we can share with them as a customer.
Very cool. Very cool. And just when you walk into this place, I mean, there's so much thought put into the experience. This is I like occupying this space more than any space I've ever occupied. I'd rather be here than, at home in the library, whatever it is. It's just very well lit, very accommodating. You walk in, there's technology all over the place, state of the art. So you just feel like you are literally in the workplace of tomorrow. And I think your team does a really good job of facilitating this warmth and the exquisite candies and all of the little things.
The hospitality. That's
what it is. Hospitality.
Yep.
Hospitality.
Yep.
And you're merging this hospitality in a learning environment, and it's just an incredible experience when you can learn, and it's a safe place to learn, and there's no bad questions, and you're eating chocolates and drinking coffee like crazy and all those different things. So in terms of your background, a lot of app development, and you're wearing this shirt. I see dev people.
It's just my favorite T-shirt.
Yeah.
Yep.
So can you just talk about what you've done in that space
Mhm.
and a little bit about what you're still passionate about and what that looks like today?
Yeah, it's a funny story. So my background back in college is applied mathematics and computer science. Of course, when I went to college, and this was way back before.
In Tehran, right?
In Tehran, yeah. I'm originally from Iran, so I was born in Tehran, and got my degree back then. And of course, when I went to college, we were talking about IBM 360 and machine language and all these mathematical problems, and you will just think, why am I doing this? Like, what's going on? I started working because my dad pushed me that, hey, you have to go and be on your own, which is a kind of different when you think about culturally in Iran versus in US right now. That's very norm. You're done with high school, or even during high school, you start working, kind of get into that mood that, hey, you
move
need
out.
to be on your own and be independent. Back in my country, that wasn't the case, but my dad pushed me that, hey, you need to go and start working in that field. So I started writing software when I was 19 years old. I'm 47, 48. I'm not scared of telling you my age.
Yeah.
But the first time I started writing, and it was in Turbo Pascal, the very first application I used to work for a bank in Tehran. That gave me this joy that has been pushing me ever since. It's like really growing a kid, right? You see it starts as an intuition, as something, as an idea, and then you make it real. To me, software development is all about that. So finished college, and ever since I've been working in different companies, different businesses. I used to do a lot of application development for airports, like here, Lava, LAX. I did projects for the Boston airport, Massport. And since early ages, I was always about interoperability, being open. Back then, there were no concept of open source. And but making sure that whatever that you write as a code or as a software, it's something that is not going to be this closed thing that nobody can do anything with it.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, way back when we had Novell and Netfair, I was all about that. I wasn't even a big fan of Microsoft back then. It was just like Windows, but somehow the destiny turned me to the other side. And ever since I started working with Microsoft technology, I've become a huge fan.
And you're talking about this open source thing,
Mm-hmm.
and people don't like. I don't have a technology background. I wasn't developing in Pascal and very very mathematics oriented technology. So, and there's all this stuff going on in the news, like Microsoft acquired GitHub,
Yep.
and then IBM made a big acquisition,
Red Hat.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like everything is becoming community oriented, open, and just doing some reading on open source. I just pulled out these 4 themes, and the themes are it's a free remix and a distribution. Anyone could tap into it. You get actual access to the source, and I've seen that from even customers going into GitHub and pulling code, algorithms, whatever, and using it. It's this cooperative nature of people helping each other, again, going back to the community. And this was interesting. It's the end to predatory vendor lock-in. So you're not having to buy some black box ecosystem that you have to live in. Like, why is everyone moving towards this? Like, why is this so important right now?
I think the third item that you brought up, the cultural aspect of it, to me is the most important part. I used to hear that, hey, when you say open source is all about free software. It's not the case, right? I mean, Red Hat is a huge business. All the other vendors that they do open source. So there's a business element of it, but the cultural aspect of it is super important. And one thing that I learned in my past 4.5 years that I became serious because of everything that happened to our personal life, which we're going to talk about it, was that you don't have to be a technologist to be able to contribute to an open source project. I mean, you can have zero knowledge of computer or software and still be able to contribute and chime in. It's the whole notion of pay it forward. And as you might have heard, GitHub announced this very awesome initiative, GitHub sponsors. And this is where that, somebody can start something super impactful just during, his or her spare time that can make a change in somebody's life. And if I can jump in and do a pull request or participate or contribute to write code, perhaps I can just, support financially however I want. And this kind of gives the fuel for the engine so they keep going, right? And to me, bringing the people together with different background, with different knowledge base, to do something good and be able to share that, to me, that's the open source. Promise.
And it seems like culturally that's where Microsoft is going.
Oh, absolutely.
And maybe there's some defensive actions from other players in the industry because they see that's where the Microsoft is going and where we're going. So to tell us more about, you mentioned your family and you mentioned, and I've heard, what you've been doing and how you've been leading this really amazing crusade against global disease, diabetes type 2.
Type 1.
Type 1, I'm sorry, type 1. And I'd love for you to talk more about like what that is.
Sure.
And in the aperture of my vision, I have this contraption here. There's there's Legos and there's Intel chips and there's monitoring devices and you have an Alexa device here. Let's talk about what you've been doing.
Yep. So we need to travel back in time. Both myself and my wife, we have history in the family with type 2 diabetes. And this is one of the areas that we don't have enough clarity about the difference between the two. So type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. There are 2 genes that if you carry those 2 genes, you're receptive to have this condition. Something triggers it. They're still, doing a lot of research, people doing a lot of research to figure out what's triggering this or what factors. Like any other autoimmune condition, that's still work in progress, so we really don't know. And when it triggers, basically your T cells, your white cells, start attacking your beta cells on your pancreas, which they're in charge of generating insulin and other hormones that regulate your blood glucose. And pretty much your pancreas stops working. In most cases, the onset is going to happen during the childhood, but we have people that they develop this condition in their 40s or even 50s. So with us having history in type 2 diabetes, like my grandfather on my wife's side, her siblings, we've always had this fear of this condition because if it's not being managed, it's a deadly disease. And we always say that, it can kill you slowly. It's not a sudden death.
And for those that don't know what type 2 diabetes is, that's dietary. So you've just been...
It could be so many different factors. Basically, your system generates insulin, but is not effective enough to still be able to regulate, right? Somebody who doesn't have type 2. Of course, things like diet and exercise, sometimes medicine, is going to help you. And in a severe condition, you're going to be insulin dependent. But for somebody who has type 1, they survive on insulin because there's no way that their pancreas can generate the insulin that the body needs to regulate the blood glucose. So with my son, out of the blue, 5 years ago, we were planning our summer's vacation during the same time that we are right now. And my wife took him for a regular checkup. And at 2 a.m., we got a call from doctor that you have to take him to hospital, to CHOC. and his blood glucose was around like 500, which is very high. So we took him to the hospital, and that night, in like a matter of 2 hours, our Dr. Endo, Dr. Bangu came, and they gave us the news. And that moment, it was more like a blackout. I mean, I was just like shattered, because the word diabetes was just like so devastating for both of us.
Because of your family history.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even though back then type 1 was kind of a little bit unknown, I still, like most people, I couldn't distinguish the differences between the two. But that's how, we got into this new normal. I remember I went to the next door. I was crying. And interestingly enough, the day before that, we had this offsite at work. And we were at Palm Spring. And we had one of these motivational speakers. That was the last session of, the 3-day summit that we had. He mentioned, it was just like this one sentence that kind of went into my brain, and I would never, ever forget that. And he said that in a moment of crisis, try to be better versus bitter. And all of a sudden, that came to my mind. I said, okay, let's figure out what we can do. So I started immediately going to Twitter. I'm like yourself,
Twitter fiend.
Very active on Twitter, LinkedIn, not much on Facebook and other social medias, and try to figure out what's going on. So immediately there were a bunch of stuff. I see people, they're doing a lot of efforts, research, whether it's stem cell or trying to use devices, but still it was more like I was very confused. Fortunately, when we talked to our endo, he mentioned that, hey, there are other families that they're dealing with the same thing, same age. Back then, Sam was 9 years old. And why don't you just start having a chat with them? So we met with another family in Irvine, Ed Raskin, who became a good friend of mine. And through him, I was introduced to this awesome group of people, either with type 1 diabetes or non-type 1, that they were doing or working on this open source project called NightScout. So I attended one of their gatherings in Anaheim, and that was the start. I instantly clicked, and the very first thing that came to my mind was that, okay, I'm working for Microsoft. Let's see what can we do and how can we help. So that relation kind of started growing and growing. Through that, I found out that there are other Microsoft leaders like Scott Hanselman and others that they do have type 1 diabetes, and they're working with the same team, same NightScout team. And we started, collaborating. And this was like 4 years ago. And I will share with you, there's a Twitter thread that I did for his 4th anniversary of, using this artificial pancreas that has all the history, how we started it. And interestingly enough, Satya got involved, and we managed to get a lot of support from Satya, Scott Godfrey, to provide Azure passes to families that they wanted to have this solution on Azure for remote monitoring, and the whole NightScout project just exploded. And ever since, it's been a great experience to be able to share what we have as a technology company to make sure we can make some impact with our families.
And I mean, and I have 2 children, and I don't know. I mean, for me, I had to look at the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes a million times before our talk, and I still screwed up the order. So, for me, there's no schema for how critical it could be for your life and your well-being. And it looks like 3 million kids in the U.S. have type 1 diabetes every year. It looks like 30,000 new cases, 29 million for U.S. adults in the U.S., and 1 in 4 don't even know that they have it.
That's
which
true.
I mean, it's definitely an epidemic. And when I was trying to find out how parents felt about this, just from listening to you. One of the quotes that I pulled, and I think it was from the NightScout's website, and I'll put all these different links in the show notes. And and this person said there were a bunch of tests and a bunch of drugs. You get dire warnings. Quote, be careful you don't kill your kid, and good luck.
That's true. That's what they tell you at the hospital, right?
That's insane.
They give you like, hey, this is your new life, this is your new normal, and you give them less insulin, they're gonna go to coma. You give them too much insulin, they're gonna die. And this is the scariest part of this condition, especially when you have small kids, is that you need to be up 24/7, because if their blood glucose goes that low, they become unconscious, and if you're not around them, they can lose their life, right? Fortunately enough, by the time that Sam was diagnosed, we had enough, technologies around us to be able to better manage this. So the first thing we did was we talked to the doctor and my friend Ed, and we started using this technology called continuous glucose monitoring, which is being manufactured by a couple of companies. Dexcom is the one that we're using, that you and we both know very well. And that was the beginning. So with the CGM, at least, I can get this semi-real time, is like every 5 minutes. It uses the interstitial fluid and converts this to a reading that tells you your blood glucose, right? And by using NightScout back then, it gave us, as a parent or caregiver, to have remote access to their data. So that screen in front of you, as you can see, this is Sam's number as we speak, real time, that the sensor generates the number. And by using a smartphone, we send this to Azure or other cloud providers. And this Node.js application, which is one of the best things that I've used in my career, it gives me that all the insights. So then I can make decision if I need to give him more insulin or less. If he's at school, we can contact the nurse, or we can send him a text now. So that was the first step, remote monitoring. And what happened after that was that, okay, this is great, but I don't want to keep staring at the web app, right?
Yeah.
Or just the data. I want to get the notification on my watch or on my phone. And for me, the real journey of like using Azure as an application platform started with this condition. And that's how I started, using some components of Azure, like notification hubs, and later on Cosmos DB. And right now we're at the point that every time something happens, my wife, myself, even Sam, they get notification on their phone, on the watch, and we always, know what's going on.
So you have this technology. It's this constant glucose monitoring, and then it showcases the device and what is coming in from the device to the web, a web-based application. But you have a sensor that's on the skin.
Yes.
And the sensor is essentially operating on the edge, and it's sending wireless data. And that wireless data gets visualized, and we're looking at this visualization. Yep. It looks like almost like a stock, like an equity chart graph or something, very complicated. And then your smartphone downloads the data to the app?
Yes, his phone.
Okay.
So basically, we use that data, and we push it to the cloud. Nowadays, Dexcom, they have their own solution. It's called Dexcom Follow and Share. And but when we started 4 years ago, we didn't have that option. And that was the genesis of these awesome community members coming together and making NightScout.
Got it.
That was a need from a caregiver and parent, that we didn't have access to the data. Nowadays, Dexcom has the same solution. It's all supported by Dexcom, and everybody's using it.
But 4 years ago, to me, this is already incredible. Obviously, we have this new technology where Yelp is able to send you notifications when you're, beacon technology and things like that. But even a year ago, this is still super, super valid technology.
And it still is. Here's the thing. You work with data. You help customers, leverage the potential of the data. Is that if it's a black box, I can't do much with it. But when I have access to the raw data, I can do a lot of stuff.
Anything you want.
Anything I want, right?
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, that was the next phase. So we started with the monitoring, which was great, but there were still a lot of manual intervention, like, ask pump or, do a pen injection for this much of insulin. And when you use pump, there is this concept of basal, which is a continuous amount of insulin that you do it like, every couple of minutes or, every hour, which kind of levels your blood glucose or regulate it in a long-term basis, 24-hour. And then you have bolus, which is basically if you want to have pizza, you know that this amount of carb, there are lots of other factors, but your system, based on your needs and your age, you need this much insulin. And still, you need to manually do all this. So this is hard for an adult. Imagine for a 9-year-old or, a 10-year-old. And we talked about interoperability, right? 4 years ago, or even up to a couple of weeks ago, you have all these manufacturers that they do bits and pieces of, like, somebody creates a pump, somebody does CGM, but they didn't talk to each other. So I had the insight, I'm getting the data from the CGM, I have the pump, but they cannot talk to each other. So what happened, there's this notion of artificial pancreas or closed loop, meaning that you have this system that can get data from a sensor, data from the pump, and then do some mathematical calculation using the algorithm to predict, okay, based on all these factors, your blood glucose is going to go up or go down. I'm going to simplify it right now, and then based on that, make a decision if you need more insulin or less. So, a couple of team members from NightScout, they kind of took this to the next level. A couple in Seattle, Dana and Scott, and they started working on building an artificial pancreas, a closed loop system. Another founding member of NightScout, Ben West, he has type 1 diabetes. He works with Dexcom actually today, but he spent like 7 years of his time reverse engineering to figure out how the pump receives signals and commands. And he found out a way to remotely, send commands programmatically to the pump, which was huge. I mean, that was the first step. So back in 2014, the couple in Seattle, Scott and Dana, they managed to start, building the very early version of this closed loop. And basically, we started automating this process. So now instead of you doing this manually, there is a system that can goes and doing this every 5 minutes automatically and adjust your insulin.
Which is life-changing because if you're a kid and you're running up and down the stairs, like you don't know.
There's so many things like, and so Dana started, sharing the results. And back then it was just like, hey, yes, we did this. We are sharing what we're doing, but we cannot just like make this available. Mm-hmm. We cannot make this open source, right? Mm-hmm. So I reached out to her and said, I want to do this for Sam. And first they were kind of skeptical, but then we started working, and we made it happen. And that's how Sam became the first kid in the world, which was kind of scary. People were skeptical. Even my own wife was just like, what are you doing? How can you trust? I mean, insulin can be like a deadliest drug. I mean, why are you doing this? But I kind of believe that, hey, this is a way to do it. We either have to wait for like another 5 years or 10 years to have something commercially available, mm-hmm. which today we have commercially products that are mm-hmm. available. I can get them. Or we're going to do this and make sure that, he has a healthy life ahead of him, and let's, use the skills that you got in your university. You have this great community. And pretty much, that's how this open source activity started to, happening, right?
Is your wife a technologist?
No.
Okay.
She has a CPA, but she's a tech savvy,
Yeah.
but she's not a
Yeah.
coder, right? But I explained to her that what we were doing and how we're doing it, and actually what you see here, this is the first version, the second basically version of the closed loop, which that Intel is the compute component. There's a custom board that talks to the pump, and also it uses Bluetooth to get the signal from the CGM here, and this was all Linux based. And I have pictures of Sam that he put this in a TikTok box in his pocket, and he went to school. And funny enough, right after Sam started using this, and we saw the same results, so we started sharing this on Twitter, and more parents got interested. And somehow I think that with what we did, following Dana and Scott and everybody else, we kind of proved that, hey, this is not as scary as you think. Now, getting back to the whole open source culture. So we started doing this in a private repo early on, eventually, and then it turned to a public GitHub repo. Everything is on GitHub. But the challenge was that we had many families that they wanted to do this, but they didn't have the technical knowledge. And as it went through different iteration, now he's using his iPhone. So there are a couple of projects. One of them is OpenAPS. OpenAPS is the one that Dana and Scott started, and eventually Sam became the second person who used it. Then there was a second effort by another great software developer, Nate. It's called Loop, which is the one that we're using today. And then we had another another community member, Pete, that his daughter has type 1, and he is a hardware designer, right? So he built this custom board and named it Riley Link because his daughter's name is Riley. And again, we have people from different technical background working together, and Loop was created. So then we had a couple of moms and a couple of dads that they started translating all that mumbo jumbo into a human readable documentation, which right now, if you go to the Loop docs, it's on GitHub, and it's like a living document that gets constantly updated. But anybody without a single knowledge of computer coding, they can build their own artificial pancreas. So when you think about liability, that's the next question that, hey, what about FDA and this and that? The way we look at it is that I cannot make this for you, but you can go read the documentation and build it for yourself.
Yeah.
Right? And everybody kind of paid forward. That's how, the documentation gets better, the solution gets better. And I think we have close to 5,000 people or families that currently they're doing this open source closed loop, either OpenAPS or Loop. We have an Android base of it, mainly in Europe. So it's huge. Now, when you think about what's next, a couple of things happened. So Dana started this community effort to use this data, because now we're talking about the insight, to use this data for research. And that's what she's been focusing on for the past
the
year and a
data
half.
from Sam,
data
and
that's
from
coming
all these
from
children.
All the children, everybody that is using
And
it.
everyone's okay, and that's part of the open source community. Everyone's
exactly.
This data is going to be used for research.
Yeah, so
excellent.
We basically reached out to the community, and if you opt in, you share your data, and now they're using it for different
predictive
research.
models, and
they presented, multiple sessions at the ADA, which is, the most important conference for diabetes. And it's helping device manufacturers or people that are involved, and that's their business, to be able to even leverage this data to make their product better. And the best part of it is that this we are not waiting effort is pushing the industry to do more and become better and work with each other. And we had a couple of spin-offs. There are lots of companies, 2 or 3 of them, that more started as a startup, but you have like founding members of NightScout or, of this bigger community that now they're doing, more impactful stuff versus just doing the open source part of this. And the way I see it, future is just bright because now we have all these companies starting talking to each other, talking about being open. You have Dexcom, working with a nonprofit organization that is doing the similar things called Tidepool. They're bringing Medtronic. They're bringing Omnipod. So you have all these different devices that now the manufacturers are okay to open this up so you can have them talking to each other. And at the end of the day, it will give you as a consumer a choice of what you want to use versus being boxed into one specific solution.
That's crazy. I mean, we're in this world right now. I mean, in the last several weeks where we have politicians on both sides of the line talking a lot of big talk about breaking up big tech. Big tech is evil. Getting the Federal Trade Commission involved, which is supposed to protect against monopolies, not the bad usage of privacy users' data and things like that. But something needs to be done. But there's all these different conversations about what's going on with big tech in a bad way. But in the middle of all this, I mean, we're talking a lot deeper about what it means to be human and what it means to truly give back to community. And I think that's inherent in us as a species. But it just blows my mind that you started off with, we need to come together and form a coalition and solve this problem, and then you solve the problem. Oh, by the way, this model that we used by coming together, now we have this currency. We have data, which is valuable. Data is the new oil, whatever, the new gold. Data is the auction for AI, all these different things. And now you're sharing this data with these massive enterprise businesses that everyone thinks is probably evil, and they're using this data, and it's teaching them how to be different and changing their culture. I mean, that's an amazing feat.
To me, if somebody comes to me and said, hey, what's the value of data, or what is this hype about machine learning or artificial intelligence? For me, the real usage of it is that diabetes is all about numbers and math and data, right? So I can write a simple algorithm that can make a prediction that, based on this much insulin or, this much carb, his blood glucose is going to be in this range for the next half an hour. But if I have that larger pool of data, I have the compute power that I can now use machine learning, use other factors, so like, weight, age,
weather, everything.
Are you doing workout or you're not doing workout? Last time that you had Big Mac at McDonald's, your body reaction to insulin and the carb like this. And then be able to predict that, hey, in the next 2 hours or 3 hours, your blood glucose is going to be in this range. It gives me more flexibility to better manage this. So we have to take Sam every 6 months for his checkup. And one of the things that they look into is the patient's A1C, average blood glucose, right? And also the deviation. Because when you look at if you put the sensor with a working pancreas, you have a pretty straight line, right? Somebody who has diabetes, if it's not being controlled, they have this roller coaster, right? They go up and they crash. So your goal is to kind of reduce the deviation so you can get it to that, flat line. And then the average A1C for somebody who has diabetes in his age, he's 14 right now, is about 7.5. Ever since we started this closed loop, he's been hovering between 5.5 to 6.5, which is like a normal person without diabetes.
Wow. So there's a device on him, and not only is it monitoring his activity and it's monitoring his levels, his glucose levels, it's also administering insulin to him in real time. Yep. And all these things are just happening.
Yeah. And every time something happens, by using Azure in my case, I get a notification on my watch hey, you can see it here. His number is kind of low, so we cut the insulin. So I get a notification from his phone through the cloud on my watch. And that helps me to kind of understand if, he needs additional help. The goal for this is for them, for anybody with type 1 diabetes, especially kids and, teenagers, to be by themselves and feel independent. So they don't feel that everybody needs to watch them.
Yeah.
And for them to feel normal. And that's the biggest value that they get. And of course, there are, short-term complication and long-term complication, things like blindness, you might lose your limb. And there are lots of other stuff that, fortunately these days, with all these solutions that we have for them, hopefully they're not going to go through this in their adult ages. And that's my goal. I want to make sure that he has a healthy life ahead of him. And he always jokes with me, just like, hey, my A1C is better than you. Stop nagging at me about this and that.
Yeah. And realistically, in your mind, you're saying, you little bastard. I say I saved your life.
Pain in the ass.
Us fathers know.
You asked about Alexa. So one of the things that happened, and again, these are all community-based, right? Not a single person can take credit for everything that is happening. Everybody has a part. Again, that's the whole pay it forward. So one of the things that happened about a year and a half ago was that a couple of developers that worked on building a skill for Alexa. And basically what this does, it allows me to get the real-time data. So imagine somebody who has diabetes, they may have some, vision impairment or, something that they cannot look at the screen or look at the watch.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, they can have that communication and get the data from Azure or, Google, Amazon, wherever, you host this application because it's open source. So the way it works, I'm going to do it right in front of you. Alexa, ask NightScout, how am I doing?
58 and holding as of 4 minutes ago. Your temp basal of 0 units per hour will end in 2 minutes and you have 5.22 units of insulin on board.
So pretty much we call an API. We get the data from a NoSQL database on Azure, all coming from a sensor from the edge. And now you can do more stuff. For example, Alexa, ask NightScout, what is the loop forecast?
According to the loop forecast, you are expected to be between 49 and 58 over the next 26 minutes.
So now what happens is that because we're predicting that he may go low, we cut the insulin, and again, everything is automated. So probably he's playing Fortnite or Battlefront, not even caring what's going on.
Yeah.
And to me, this is the power of data. This is the power of open source. This is the power of interoperability. And one thing that I can tell you is in Microsoft, and I'm sure it's the same thing in other companies, we have people that they do care about using technology for a good cause, for a common good, all the way up to Satya. So when he comes and say, hey, at Microsoft, we're here about empowering organizations and individuals to do better, this is it. This is the example. One thing that I recommend for your audience, Scott Hanselman has a great talk that talks about his journey with diabetes. And again, he's another one of the founding members of this community. He's been doing things related to diabetes from way back. He always has this example of a palm device that he used to build software for it. And I always ask Sam that, hey, nobody understands this disease unless you have it. But I'm trying to help you, but maybe you should listen to somebody like Scott, and that will give you the insight that how important it is for you in this age and in this era to have access to all this technology. And for companies like Microsoft, that they invest, and again, this is just one example of so many different things, what we're doing in healthcare and in other industries. But it's not a hype. So data, machine learning, artificial intelligence is real, and as long as we bring the people together with the right skill, we can do some major impacts to the community.
And I was I think you sent me this link in Microsoft Build, which is essentially a massive developer conference where all these app developers come.
Yep.
This is probably your Christmas time, right?
Yeah.
So Easy Glucose was a product or a solution built by this young man, Brian Ching, out of UCLA.
He won the prize.
Yeah. So there's a national competition called Imagine Cup, where they're coming up with these different solutions that are essentially just very good for the human species.
Yeah.
And he won the national competition, and he went and took it and won the worldwide competition. It's hosted by Microsoft, and he won like some $100,000 for the global. He got $50,000 in Azure consumption credits and a mentoring session with Satya Nadella, the CEO. And what he designed was a non-invasive diabetic reading device.
Yeah, just take a picture of your eye, and based on the movement and the changes, he has a machine learning algorithm, and he's a UCLA student, right?
Yeah.
And what happened? He wanted to help his grandmother that has diabetes, type 2 diabetes. So everything starts with just how can I help? How can I make somebody's life better? And you put the data, you put the technology together, and bam, magic happens.
So really cool. Just a really cool topic. So so you have this high degree of energy, and you just have this love for technology. I mean, where did all that come from? You're educated at Islamic Azad University in Iran. And then you had a pretty hardcore father that was pushing you. And obviously you talked about, being with your wife, and I'm sure she's a big component of these different, so all these different variables that are coming together. But you have a great amount of energy, and you're constantly trying to solve these problems. And it seems like I've never seen you frustrated or in a bad mood. What's empowered you to be able to have this perspective on technology and solving problems?
Great question. So, very simple. As a parent, the worst thing that can happen to you is to hear something like this, like a chronic condition, that can impact your kid for the rest of his or her life, right? So every time I'm challenged at work, like, a project, or, you're frustrated, or, could be so many different things, right? I think what can be worse than that night that he was diagnosed and they came to us and they gave us the news, right? Could be worse. There are far worse conditions that people deal with. I think that's a human nature. I mean, when you deal with something like this, every other thing that can be like semi-important prior to that diagnosis becomes irrelevant. So that by itself, that's my secret sauce, right? I'm being asked to do something that I haven't done. Of course, I get stressed out. This, and then you would think, okay, what's going to be worse? And then all of a sudden, everything turns to something very simple.
So that was a tipping point for you, where your DNA just got re-engineered, and you've been a different person since that time.
100%.
So the person I see is a different person than you were before.
I wasn't that bad, but yes, I mean, it changes your perspective. Again, you've read Satya's book, right? He kind of opens up about his personal life, and here's another thing, the other aspect of it is that when you have the ability to share your vulnerabilities to others, that becomes something very positive and kind of opens your mind in terms of how you can make the impact to make others better, right? There are so many people that they don't want to share about the hardship that they're going through. Could be so many different things. For me, going to the community, going to social networks, sharing, learning from others, that was something that, hey, it's okay, this happened. Now, this is not the end of the world. Again, try to be better versus bitter, right? And from time to time, I hear from people reaching out that, hey, that single tweet that you did on your Twitter with the picture of Sam at school, that was the motivation for me to go and do the same thing for my daughter or for my son. And those people, now they're even more active than I am, right? So it kind of is contagious, and it continues.
So what do you do to learn? Because let's say this happened 4 years ago. I mean, you're in a space. I mean, we're surrounded by like the most top of the line, leading edge technology. I mean, we're looking at this crazy chart in front of us. You're getting notifications about your son's levels. I mean, this is pretty top tier engineering stuff. I mean, what is like? How do you keep learning, and how do you stay up on this different stuff? And you're managing essentially a staff here at the MTC, and you're taking some new leadership roles on, and you're getting in front of customers constantly and challenging them on how to make themselves better. What are you doing on your time to accelerate your learning?
So that Challenger training that we all went through, I think it was last year, right? It's all about like you need to keep challenging yourself. You never settle with something that you already gained and you feel comfortable. So you always kind of kicking yourself to go to that uncomfortable place, right? And to me, being hands-on is the most important things. For me, the way I learned how to work with Azure, it wasn't working on a Contoso demo. It was building something real. For me, the need was, hey, I love this open source project, NightScout, but I want to do more, right? Let's use Azure. So I started learning about components of Azure, how to write code. And interestingly enough, that has been helping me kind of sharing that knowledge with the customers. And the other thing is, whenever I have customer, you've been with me in numerous sessions with your customers at the MTC, I always start with, something personal. And this is my story. This is my restarting point. So when you talk about hit refresh, which was the title of Satya's book, this is for me that night at a hospital was the time that I had to refresh my personality, the way I look at life, the way I can make impact to others. And every person has that moment at some point. It's just making sure that you're gonna capitalize on it and helping yourself, your loved one, and then the broader community as well.
And I was just going to ask you that. Like, I'm so glad that you covered that, because a lot of people are afraid of their jobs. They're afraid of not being able to learn fast enough. I mean, I'm not 40 yet, but there's folks that are in their low to mid to late 40s, getting into their 50s, and they talk to me, behind closed doors about they're fearful of ageism. They're fearful of not being able to learn fast enough, especially with things accelerating as fast as they are. But you're bringing something a lot more personal to this, and it's a good driver for how people should look at even learning or technology. What really drives them to learn more, to learn faster? What are they passionate about? And then involving your hands in it and really building it themselves. I mean, there's some constants here that I'm hearing.
Here's another point. Like, this is the reason I look at the notion of open source as more like a cultural thing versus just a thing, is that we should not ever feel that we are alone and we can do everything by ourselves. There's always a community that you can join. You can participate, you can add value, but in the meantime, leverage from the work that they've already done. And this whole thing about, building on shoulder of giants, this is it, right? I got involved with diabetes 4 years ago. Before me, there were a lot of people inside Microsoft. I started to kind of get to know them because we kind of started getting connected through this condition. That was a commonality. I knew Scott as somebody who was doing .NET forever, right? I never knew that he has type 1, right? But this kind of connected us together, and there's so many different, many examples like this. And diabetes is just like one condition. And I'm sure if you look at other big companies, there are similar stories that, you hear about them or, you know, you read about them. It's just like we're getting to a point that everybody kind of coming together for the common good. So I love when I see like Microsoft partners with Google to work on some open source projects. Or Google uses our product like, you know, Visual Studio Code. I mean, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, who would have thought, right?
Yeah.
So I think future is bright, and I think we are going to a very awesome route that has been led by our leaders and everybody else. And I think this is the best time to be in this field.
Yeah. I think culturally interoperability that's at your core. That's what I'm sensing from you.
Yep.
I mean, and it makes so much sense, especially, I mean, I was talking to a leader at Microsoft, Sarah Nagy, and Sarah was, she kind of pinged me and she said, hey, I'd like to start a blog or a podcast or whatever. And I said, sure, what are you doing? And she wanted to get some advice. And she said, well, I'm interviewing these doctors about diabetes. And I'm like, you got to talk to Ali. And she's like, who's Ali? Send her your video on LinkedIn. And I think she got in touch with you.
Yeah, we've been in contact ever since. Right?
It's the power of social leverage and the network effects of all these different things. So it's so important to share.
Absolutely. And again, even when I deal with customers here, they come here, most of the time when I share this story, there's somebody in the audience that either has type 1 or knows somebody, and then they reach out, hey, you know, can you share, how can we do this for, you know, our friends and families? And again, that's the whole notion of paying it forward, right? And hope is they're going to go and do the same thing. And that's how we started when we did the closed loop. Started with like one couple. Sam became the second person. And then after that, you know, everybody else they started joining the club. I think it was a year and a half ago, I heard that a cardiologist in Seattle, he did it for his 1-year-old daughter. And if you go and look for the We Are Not Waiting hashtag on Twitter, every day you see a lot of story and, you know, how people sharing, how they're helping each other. And this is like a worldwide effort, so it's not just in the U.S.
This is just such a great story. Really, really great story. Really appreciate you sharing this, Ali, and I'm looking forward to learning more from you and watching you teach customers and just seeing you walk around this place with just so much energy and heart in everything that you do. And we love having you on the team.
No, thank you for your time. This is great. I enjoy your podcast. I'm a member, so continue doing it and looking forward to have this more with you.
And then if folks want to reach out to you, I'm going to put all the different links.
Yep. So I'm always on Twitter,
Okay.
Ali Mazaheri, and if you can share, that would be great. Also, I'm very active on LinkedIn, so anybody who has question or, you know, suggestion, I'm more than glad to have a conversation with them.
Okay, great.
And you can always find me at the MTC. This is my second home.
Yeah, it's a good home to be in.
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Ali.
All right. Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.